Fair is foul, and foul is fair, hover through the fog and filthy air. Picture it, a storm-battered moor in medieval Scotland. Rain lashes the earth, mist coils around ancient stones, and through the gloom emerge three twisted shapes, cloaked and crooked. Witches. They circle, whispering in voices that seem to echo in the very air itself. Their chant is not just sound, but a spell, blurring the line between good and evil. Fair is foul, and foul is fair. It's a warning that nothing ahead can be trusted. Lightning lights up the sky, revealing their outstretched hands and hollow eyes. Then, darkness, silence. Shakespeare opens Macbeth not with a hero, but with prophecy, with thunder, with magic, and with malice. From the very first moments of the play, we are plunged into a world where truth is slippery and fate wears a crooked smile. As the witches vanish into mist, they leave behind a chilling promise. This will be a story of darkness. Hello and welcome to another episode of Study Sessions. My name, of course, is Mr. Boff. And in today's episode, we are going to take a scene-by-scene deep dive into the witches in Macbeth. The reason why we're doing this is not only are the witches important in the play, crucial, there is no play really without them, there's certainly no story, but we also need to focus on the witches because they have not yet come up as a specific focus. Yes, we've looked at the supernatural before, but today's episode is very much specifically centered around those three weird sisters. Now, it's worth remembering that at the very start of Shakespeare's play Macbeth, before we meet the titular hero or any other Scottish noble, we encounter three mysterious figures on a stormy heath. And amid thunder and lightning, so kind of chaotically disrupted weather, these witches, or indeed weird sisters, as they are called in the play, speak in riddles and paradoxes. In a incantatory chorus, they famously proclaim, "Fair is foul, and foul is fair." Now, this ominous paradox is far more than just some eerie, unsettling opener. It strikes at the heart of the play. And throughout the course of the play, it is the witches' cryptic language and equivocating prophecies that set the tone for a world where appearance and reality blur, ambiguity reigns, and moral order is subverted. So, we're going to work chronologically through the scenes in which the witches or weird sisters appear, or indeed where they are referenced, delving into their enigmatic speech and thinking about their relationship with those crucial themes of ambiguity and equivocation, as well as their relationship to fate and to prophecy, as well as, in addition to that, their portrayal as malevolent instigators of chaos. Now, despite their brief appearances in the play, the witches have an outsized influence on the action of Macbeth and indeed the atmosphere. They speak in a distinctive, otherworldly manner, often in rhymed couplets and using an unusual poetic meter, which is very different than the poetic meter employed for human characters, and they seem to delight in contradictions. The witches blur the boundary between, as we've just quoted, fair and foul, setting up the play's central theme of deceptive appearances. What seems good may be evil and vice versa. Crucially, it is their prophecies that spark and ignite Macbeth's ambitions. They enkindle, to use a word from the play itself, they enkindle his ambitions and create tension between fate and free will. They pose questions for the audience too. Are they predicting the future or provoking it? So we're going to be seeing how Macbeth interprets and acts on their words, sealing his own doom. Shakespeare composed Macbeth in the early 1600s when, it is worth noting, belief in witchcraft was widespread. The king at the time, King James I himself, was famously fixated on both witches and demonology. So these characters would have been seen by the original audience as agents of the devil, to quote Banquo, instruments of darkness. They are embodiments of demonic temptation and disorder. Now, we're going to touch on, at times, historical context, but only ever, indeed as we should do in our essays, only ever to illuminate certain passages. Our primary focus, as indeed it should be for yourselves in your essays, should remain on Shakespeare's text itself. So let's think about Act 1, Scene 1, the opening act, the opening scene of the play, the way it sets the tone of ambiguity and evil. The play opens in a desert place under thunder and lightning as the three witches convene. Their entire dialogue in this brief scene is a series of enigmatic utterances that immediately establish the play's atmosphere of ominous uncertainty. The first witch asks, "When shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain?" implying they only gather amid storms and turmoil. The second witch answers, "When the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won." Now, this reply is our first example as audience members of the witch's paradoxical language. Hurly-burly or uproar suggests chaos. A battle that is simultaneously lost and won hints that in the moral universe of this play, victory and defeat may somehow be indistinguishable from one another, or that every gain comes at a cost. Indeed, this echoes how the coming story will unfold. Macbeth's victories, particularly gaining the throne himself, are, in a sense, also losses. It results in the damnation of his soul, giving his eternal jewel to the common enemy of man. Now, the third witch adds, that will be ere the set of sun, confirming they plan to meet again before sunset, in darkness. When the first witch asks where the place, the second answers, "Upon the heath." The third witch concludes, "There to meet with Macbeth." Now, the heath location is interesting. It's outside, it is beyond, it is separate from organized human society and structures. Okay, they're not meeting in the middle of a village, they're not meeting in the middle of a city, they're outside, they're separate, they're other, and they're meeting with Macbeth. It is a name introduced, therefore, by the witches themselves, before we ever even see the man. This foreshadows the dark connection between Macbeth and these evil beings. They've singled him out for some purpose. In fact, one might say the witches envision or even enact Macbeth's destiny in this opening. As a number of people have considered, no sooner has the name Macbeth been uttered than the calls of the attendant spirits are heard and the witches hurry off. The action of the scene is over with the naming of the man against whose soul these ministers or instruments of darkness are plotting. Right from the start, the witches align themselves against Macbeth's soul, marking him as their target. Now, before they vanish, the witches together chant the couplet that defines the play's central theme. "Fair is foul, and foul is fair. Hover through the fog and filthy air." This antithesis, or juxtaposing of opposites, fair, foul, is a form of equivocation. It suggests that nothing is as it seems. Beauty may hide corruption, and ugliness may mask goodness. These words cast a form of spell, and it's a spell of moral confusion that lingers and permeates the entire drama. Notably, the witches speak in a peculiar rhythm here. It's not the usual iambic pentameter of Shakespeare's nobles, but it's what's known as trochaic tetrameter. For example, the cadence, that falling cadence of double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn, and cauldron bubble later in the play also follows this pattern. Fair is foul, foul is fair also has that 8 syllables with a kind of heavy chanting stress. Now, this is an unusual meter or form of stress and rhythm employed by Shakespeare, and it is often used for supernatural characters like witches or in other plays like fairies. It makes their speech incantatory, a type of verbal spell. The rhymes, fair and air, and that alliteration, fog and filthy, creates a hypnotic, strange, sing-song quality. Shakespeare thereby gives the witches a singular voice in the play that sounds otherworldly, supernatural, reinforcing the sense at the level of sound and language that they operate outside the human realm of order. So in these opening lines, we already see the witches' malevolent nature. They delight in the filthy atmosphere of the storm and the fog. They conflate the fair and the foul. They undermine moral distinctions. And crucially, and most importantly perhaps, they plot to meet Macbeth, hinting that they have plans in store for him. My goodness, they do. The scene ends with them calling out to their familiar spirits, Grey Malkin, Cat, Paddock, a toad, and then disappearing. Chaos, confusion, dark intent. The witches have set the stage, quite literally, for the tragedy to come. As the scene closes, the audience is left uneasy. Who are these creatures, and what do they want with Macbeth? The next time we see them, in Scene 3, we begin to find out. So, Act 1, Scene 3, we've got prophecy and paradox. The witches tempt Macbeth and, in a sense, Banquo. So we next come across the witches, we encounter them as an audience, those weird sisters, in Act 1, Scene 3. And it is a pivotal scene in which Macbeth and Banquo come face to face with these hags, to quote the play, and hear their prophecies. The scene opens with the witches displaying some petty malevolence and supernatural mischief, underscoring their chaotic evil. I love this bit of the play. One witch describes how she's been out killing swine. Another recounts a spiteful act. A sailor's wife refused to share her chestnuts, which is interesting. So the witch vows revenge by tormenting the woman's husband at sea. I'll drain him dry as hay. Sleep shall neither night nor day hang upon his penthouse lid. He shall live, a man forbid. Weary se'nights 9 times 9 shall he dwindle, peak, and pine. She's going to summon winds to batter the man's ship. Though his bark cannot be lost, yet it shall be tempest-tossed. This little subplot reveals a few key points about the witches, which I think many students will probably overlook. They are vindictive and cruel, punishing rather innocuous slights. Most people would consider not sharing chestnuts as rather innocuous in the grand scheme of the universe, with what seems to be disproportionate cruelty. And they have some power or control over nature, the power to raise storms, but they don't have absolute power. For example, the witch can't sink the ship outright. It's a little brief window into their character. They are malicious agents of chaos, delighting in human suffering for its own sake. Interesting, too, that they mention disturbing sleep. Sleep shall neither night nor day hang upon his penthouse lid. The idea of sleeplessness and disturbed sleep is something we'll come to a little bit later on. As they finish this evil gloating, a drum beats and it signals Macbeth's approach. The witches intone, a drum, Macbeth doth come. When Macbeth and Banquo enter, Banquo is struck immediately by the strange appearance of the 3 women. He describes them as withered and wild in their attire, with choppy fingers and skinny lips. Most peculiarly, though, he notes, "You should be women, and yet your beards forbid me to interpret that you are so." The witches' gender ambiguity, they have beards, and yet they seem to be women, renders them even more transgressive and unnatural. Banquo's puzzled remark highlights how the witches upset the natural order. They don't fit into societal categories of male or female. This fits in with notions at the time of witches as women with unnatural features, this horrible image of bearded old crones. That's what's being played upon here by Shakespeare. It also resonates with the theme of fair is foul. Even their identity itself seems like some kind of equivocation. They're also at once familiar, female in dress, and alien, male in feature. Everything about them, their language, their dress, their appearance on earth, their gender, everything about them blurs boundaries. When Banquo addresses them, live you, or are you aught that man may question? He is unsure if they are mortal or spirits. Rather than answering Banquo's questions directly, like any good equivocator, of course, the witches turn immediately to Macbeth with a dramatic hail of titles. The first witch says, "All hail Macbeth! Hail to thee, Thane of Glamis." The second, "All hail Macbeth! Hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor." And the third, here we go, "All hail Macbeth, that shalt be king hereafter." In these three proclamations, the witches prophesy Macbeth's rise in status. The first title, Thane of Glamis, Macbeth already holds, inherited from his father. The second, Thane of Cawdor, is news to him. He has not yet been granted that title, but the audience knows from the previous scene that King Duncan has decided to bestow it upon Macbeth for his valour. Lovely bit of dramatic irony there. The third promise, king, is the grandest and the most startling. Macbeth is stunned by these predictions, and Banquo, in contrast, challenges the witches to speak to him as well. If you can look into the seeds of time and say which grain will grow and which will not, speak then to me. Banquo neither fully believes nor dismisses them. He's curious, but cautious and skeptical too. The witches oblige Banquo with some more prophecies, but in a much more riddling form. They answer him in a whole series of paradoxes. Lesser than Macbeth and greater. Not so happy, yet much happier. Thou shalt get kings, though thou be none. So all hail, Macbeth and Banquo. Now that last one means Banquo will father, he will beget kings, but he's not going to be king himself. These statements are puzzling. They're like verbal riddles. How can someone be both lesser and greater at once? Or not as happy as someone else and yet happier? The genius of these phrases is revealed, but only later. But on first hearing, for the audience and for Banquo and Macbeth, they exemplify the witches' penchant for speaking in contradictions. Banquo will be lesser in rank than Macbeth, since Macbeth will be king, and Banquo will remain a mere thane, but greater in moral stature. He, Banquo, will not succumb to murderous ambition, the vaulting ambition that Macbeth does. Not so happy in fortune, Banquo's not going to be experiencing the short-term glory of being king, and yet much happier in the long run, as his conscience remains clear and his lineage will eventually ascend to the throne. In short, Banquo's destiny, as implied, is to die soon, not a happy fate by any means, but to be spared the eternal damnation or torment that Macbeth earns. Furthermore, Banquo's heirs will rule, which in a sense grants Banquo a different kind of fulfillment, maybe a particularly masculine sense of fulfillment within the notions of masculinity at the time. All of this is encoded in the witches' tantalizing riddles. They don't lie outright. Notably, the witches never say anything untrue, at least technically untrue, in the play, but they speak half-truths, and they mislead by ambiguity. This is Shakespeare's portrayal of equivocation, the usage of words that have double meanings or some sort of hidden cat. As we'll see, Macbeth will interpret the prophecies in the way most favourable to his desires, overlooking all of the caveats, the warnings, the idea that he needs to beware what they're saying. After delivering these predictions, the witches vanish abruptly, almost playfully refusing to clarify further. That's part of the way they tantalize Macbeth. When Macbeth implores them to stay and explain, they melt into thin air. "Stay, you imperfect speakers, tell me more," Macbeth cries. But it's too late. How much in that line is so powerful? Stay, you speakers, tell me more. On the one hand, desperate to know more, at the same time, imperfect, a recognition that there's something not right about these speakers, but that doesn't stop him demanding that they tell him more. In a rather humorous touch, Banquo compares the vanished witches to bubbles of the earth. The earth hath bubbles as the water has, and these are of them. Remember, neither one thing nor another. On the earth, and yet they don't really look part of it. Banquo and Macbeth are left alone then to grapple with what they've just heard, but almost immediately, confirmation of one prophecy arrives. Ross and Angus, as messengers from King Duncan, enter and announce that Macbeth has been named, guess what? Thane of Cawdor, the title just mentioned by the witches. Macbeth, astonished, says, and this is a really key metaphor, this metaphor of clothing, "Why do you dress me in borrowed robes?" He's imagining the title belongs to someone else. Indeed, it apparently, from his vantage point, does. It's the former Thane of Cawdor, who still lives, but we very quickly learn is condemned for treason. When Ross explains, of course, that Cawdor is to be executed, and the title is now Macbeth's, Banquo observes Macbeth's reaction closely. This is a crucial juncture, a kind of turning point, a pivotal moment. Macbeth and Banquo react markedly differently, very, very differently, starkly differently to the Weird Sisters' prophecies, and their reactions reveal something of their character. Macbeth is transfixed, rapt. Banquo says, "Look how our partner's rapt," noticing that enchanted, mesmerized, almost trance-like state. Macbeth is already imagining the imperial theme of kingship as he says, in an aside, notice the duplicity, "Two truths are told as happy prologues to the swelling act of the imperial theme." The fulfillment of the first two prophecies, Glamis, Cawdor, makes him believe, almost instantaneously, that the third, King, might truly be in his reach, within his reach. In an aside, Macbeth's mind races through possibilities. This supernatural soliciting cannot be ill, cannot be good. Here again, we see equivocation and ambiguity gripping him. He's of two minds. If the prophecy is evil, we might say foul, cannot be ill, why has it given him a truthful success, Cawdor? But if it's good, why does it trigger horrid imaginings in him? Macbeth admits that the mere thought of fulfilling the kingship prophecy by foul means, regicide, whose horrid image doth unfix my hair, makes his heart pound against his ribs. In other words, even before any action is taken, Macbeth experiences a temptation, the enkindling of a desire to murder, the suggestion, as he says, of killing King Duncan crosses his mind unbidden, and it, for now, terrifies him. My thought, I love this moment, my thought, whose murder yet is but fantastical, shakes so, my single state of man that function is smothered in surmise, and nothing is but what is not. This line is dense, but it's telling. His function, his capacity to act or reason, later that's going to be symbolized by the motif or through the motif of hands, is overwhelmed by speculative fantasy, surmise. And his grasp on reality itself falters. Nothing is but what is not. Nothing is real to him except that which is imaginary. The witch's prophecy has, quite literally, bewitched Macbeth. His sense of reality, his sense of morality is beginning to blur. Might say it's beginning to break down. This is the witch's first and most powerful weapon, perhaps, the power of suggestion and temptation. They plant a seed. You shall be king. and then they let Macbeth's own ambition drive him, almost immediately, to treacherous thoughts. Banquo, in contrast, remains far more grounded and skeptical. He cautions Macbeth that evil forces often tell small truths to betray people in much deeper ways, and oftentimes, he says, to win us to our harm, the instruments of darkness tell us truths. They win us with honest trifles to betray in deepest consequence. It's a profound warning that encapsulates the witch's strategy. They are, he's right, instruments of darkness, and they have lured Macbeth with an honest trifle, a truthful minor prophecy about Cawdor, which might lead to disastrous consequences if Macbeth trusts him. Banquo's use of honest trifles and deepest consequence highlights that theme of equivocation again. The witch's statements are technically honest in small matters, but dangerously misleading if you think about the bigger picture. Banquo shows wisdom here, sagacity, we might say, in recognizing that these prophecies could be a trap. He doesn't deny that the witches spoke truth about Macbeth's new title, but, and he's right to do so, he suspects their motives. What? Can the devil speak true? He exclaims this when Macbeth is hailed as Cawdor. Banquo immediately associates the weird sisters with the devil, reflecting that typical Jacobean view that witches served Satan. His wary stance contrasts with Macbeth's eager absorption, if you will, of their words. So by the scene's end, Macbeth, recovering himself publicly, decides to leave things to chance for the moment. He says, a personal reflection this, if chance will have me king, why, chance may crown me without my stir. On the surface, this suggests that Macbeth is content to let fate run its course without his interference. It seems wise. It's rather passive resolution. He echoes the language of fate, chance, as if he's trying to resist taking action. However, whether Macbeth truly holds to this is doubtful. Already, the prospect of kingship has kindled a hidden fire in him. Banquo notes that Macbeth is rapt and later says Macbeth is enthralled by the prophecies. Indeed, Macbeth's letters to his wife, which we're going to have a look at in the next scene, show he's deeply excited. The witches, without coercion, without threat or violence, have unearthed. They've excavated Macbeth's latent ambition. They haven't told him to commit any crime. They just dangle the prize of the throne before him. And herein lies one of the play's central questions. Do the witches control fate, or do they simply set events in motion by playing on human weaknesses? Shakespeare, like so much of the play, he leaves this ambiguous. The witches are clearly catalysts. They trade and traffic with Macbeth in riddles and affairs of death. But they don't make him do anything. Macbeth's actions are his own, spurred on by his interpretation of prophecy. So, let's turn to Act 1, Scene 5, Lady Macbeth and the Prophecy of the Witches. In Scene 5, the witches themselves don't appear, but we want to demonstrate that their influence extends, it permeates every aspect of the play. So we're not just thinking about moments where they just happen to be on stage, we're thinking about the play more broadly. And we can really see the influence of the witches in Act 1, Scene 5. So they don't appear, but their influence is really strongly felt, as we see how Lady Macbeth's letter about the encounter galvanizes Lady Macbeth. At Macbeth's castle in Inverness, Lady Macbeth reads aloud, for the benefit of the audience, the letter in which Macbeth recounts his meeting with those weird sisters. He describes how they, quote, met me in the day of success, and how they hailed him, Thane of Cawdor, and King that shalt be. This have I thought good to deliver thee, my dearest partner of greatness, Macbeth writes, that thou mightst not lose the dews of rejoicing by being ignorant of what greatness is promised thee. Several things stand out here. Now, Macbeth refers to the witches as weird sisters. It's spelled in the original folio, the original publishing, and printing of this as wayward or wayard, a term Shakespeare borrowed from Holinshed's Chronicles, and it means fateful or destiny-dealing women. He calls Lady Macbeth his partner of greatness, indicating the depth of the relationship and his immediate impulse to include her in the promise of the prophecy. So we've got this sense then of these witches as weird sisters, wayward, and even the word weird at the time Shakespeare's writing would be pronounced so it sounded a bit more like wayard, like that. Okay, so we've got this very close connection between the witches and like destiny and fate and the future. That promise of greatness has taken hold of Macbeth's imagination. So he's almost celebrating it, those dews of rejoicing. It's a letter that confirms Macbeth's personal fascination and growing belief in the witch's words. He's treating their prophecy as some kind of promise. It's definitely going to come true from his perspective. Lady Macbeth's reaction is equally telling. She instantly accepts the prophecy as truth and then resolves to propel Macbeth towards fulfilling it. Glamis thou art, and Cawdor, and shalt be what thou art promised, she famously declares. Yet I do fear thy nature. It is too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. In other words, she believes Macbeth will be king as promised by the witches, but she worries he's too gentle, too womanly or feminine to seize the crown by the quickest method, which of course is regicide. This scene shows the witch's influence spreading like some kind of poison. Lady Macbeth is very effectively recruited almost instantaneously by the prophecy. She invokes dark forces, darkness, the forces of darkness, the witches, remember, instruments of darkness, to aid her in pushing Macbeth beyond his moral scruples. Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, she prays, unsex me here, and fill me from the crown to the toe, top full of direst cruelty. She calls on these witch-like spirits to strip her of feminine compassion and to thicken her blood, an invocation very much parallel to something like a witch's spell. Lady Macbeth herself never meets the weird sisters in person, but she seems to voluntarily take up their cause, as it were, by embracing the evil necessary to make the prophecy a reality. With chilling determination, she plans to chastise with the valour of her tongue anything that stands in Macbeth's way, including his own hesitations. This is a brief but a critical link in the chronology of the witch's impact. Through the letter, their prophecy infects Lady Macbeth, who becomes an instigator in her own right. The fair is foul theme again surfaces. Lady Macbeth famously counsels Macbeth to hide his true intent. Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. She's teaching him to equivocate, to present a fair appearance and hide a foul reality. That concept of appearance versus reality, inaugurated by the witches, thus finds a potent disciple in Lady Macbeth. When Macbeth arrives, she urges swift action, saying Duncan, who's currently king, must be provided for. I love that. Fantastic euphemism for basically killing him when he visits their castle. Macbeth is still conflicted, but doesn't resist the plan for very long. By the end of the first act, husband and wife have conspired to commit regicide. The witches themselves are absent, yet their foul influence is operating through human agents. It is as if the witch's malevolent spirit has been internalized by the Macbeths. It's kind of a chain. The instruments of darkness have themselves made instruments of the Macbeths. We turn now, Act 2, Scene 1. And we're thinking about Banquo's quiet resistance, but also Macbeth's vision, that idea of the witches being on their mind. In the beginning of Act 2, we get a brief but very revealing reference to the Weird Sisters in some dialogue, again, dialogue that's often overlooked by students, between Banquo and Macbeth. It's now past midnight at the castle. Banquo, unable to sleep, admits to his son Fleance, "A heavy summons lies like lead upon me, and yet I would not sleep. Merciful powers, restrain in me the cursed thoughts that nature gives way to in repose." This is suggesting Banquo has been troubled by dreams of the witches. Indeed, when Macbeth appears, Banquo confides in his friend, "I dreamt last night of the three weird sisters. To you, they've showed some truth." Banquo's unsettled. Even in sleep, the witches haunt him with those cursed thoughts. We sense that Banquo, although he's virtuous, is still human. The prophecy tempts his imagination too. After all, it promised his descendants would be kings. Yet Banquo prays for merciful powers, the forces of heaven, God, to help him resist these dark temptations. This is a crucial contrast to Macbeth, who does not pray for help resisting ambition. Instead, he embraces the dark idea. When Banquo mentions the witches, Macbeth brazenly, we know this, lies. "I think not of them," he says. How terse and brief that is. In truth, Macbeth has been thinking of little else. His very next words, however, undermine his denial. He suggests to Banquo that they talk soon about that very prophecy, hinting, "If you shall cleave to my consent when 'tis, shall make honour for you." In essence, Macbeth is testing if Banquo will support him when the time comes to fulfill the prophecy. Likely, Macbeth is already contemplating Duncan's murder. Banquo's reply is principled. "So I lose none in seeking to augment it. That is, I will do nothing dishonourable." The quote was, "So I lose none in seeking to augment it." He wants to lose none of his honour or violate his allegiance to the king in order to boost Macbeth's honour. "But if I can keep my conscience clear, I'll support you." That's essentially what he's saying. Banquo refuses to condone any foul play. He's making it clear to Macbeth and the audience that he will only help Macbeth within the bounds of loyalty and honour. This again aligns Banquo with moral clarity and Macbeth with moral equivocation. Macbeth's face is already a false face. He feigns indifference about the witches while scheming treason in his heart. After Banquo exits, Macbeth hallucinates the famous floating dagger leading towards Duncan's chamber. In the soliloquy that follows, you even hear the language of witchcraft and evil permeates Macbeth's imagination. He says, "Now, o'er the one half world nature seems dead, and wicked dreams abuse. The curtains sleep. Witchcraft celebrates pale Hecate's offerings, and withered murder thus with his stealthy pace towards his design moves like a ghost." It's vivid imagery, and it explicitly invokes Hecate, the goddess of witchcraft, whom we're going to meet later as the kind of leader of the witches, and also personifies murder, capital M, murder, as a ghostly, wolf-assisted figure creeping in the night. Macbeth's mind is steeped in the supernatural darkness the witches introduced all the way back in Act 1, Scene 1. The night of Duncan's murder is presented as a kind of Black Sabbath. Nature is dead. Time for witchcraft and offerings to Hecate, and the forces of evil are at their height, at their kind of pinnacle. Macbeth, on the brink of committing regicide, is very much entering the witch's sphere of influence spiritually. He calls on the night to hide his deed, similar to Lady Macbeth's earlier invocation. In effect, though Macbeth says he's not thinking of the weird sisters to Banquo, his subconscious is absolutely full of references to witchcraft, indicating how deeply their prophecy and the evil it entails have kind of sunk in and been absorbed. So, in Act 2, Scene 1, while the weird sisters don't appear physically, they're present in the minds, but also in the language of the characters. Banquo struggles to push them out of his thoughts and succeeds in not acting on their prophecy. Macbeth, however, is embracing those wicked dreams and that fatal vision that draw him towards an act of murder. The thematic conflict of fate versus free will, is at play. Banquo chooses not to act on the prophecy, thus remaining free of guilt, though fate still takes his life later. Whereas Macbeth chooses to force fate's hand, spurred on by the prophecy's allure. Once Macbeth kills Duncan, off stage at the end of this scene and the next, the prophecy of kingship starts to come true in the most sinister way. Importantly, it is Macbeth's own choices that bring it about. The witches haven't reappeared to prod him, they just set the stage. It's Macbeth who takes the step. This raises the question, would Macbeth have become king without murdering Duncan? The witches didn't say how he would become king. Perhaps by chance, Duncan might have named him heir, or circumstances could have intervened. But Macbeth couldn't leave it to chance after all. He made chance happen with a dagger. The witch's prophecy thus finds fulfillment, but with foul means. A classic case, if you will, of a self-fulfilling prophecy fueled here by ambition. After Duncan's murder, Acts 2 and 3 showcase the fallout. Macbeth's crowned king. Banquo grows suspicious, I fear, played most foully for it, and Scotland plunges into chaos and turmoil. During this time, the witches lurk in the background of the characters' minds. Macbeth, now king, is racked with paranoia. He remembers the prophecy that Banquo's descendants will be kings, and this galls him. It implies his own line won't continue on the throne. In Act 3, Scene 1, Macbeth soliloquizes that Banquo is the only man in Scotland he fears. Thou hast it now, King, Cawdor, Glamis all, and I fear thou played most foully for it, Banquo earlier reflected about Macbeth. Banquo strongly suspects Macbeth achieved the prophecy by foul means, by regicide. But Banquo holds his tongue publicly, while Macbeth plots further foul deeds. Macbeth muses that the witches hailed Banquo father to a line of kings. Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown, no son of mine succeeding. He notes bitterly that he has defiled or filed his mind, given his eternal jewel, his soul, to the common enemy of man, Satan the devil, to gain the crown, only for Banquo's progeny, offspring, descendants to benefit. For Banquo's issue have I filed my mind, for them I have murdered the gracious Duncan, put rancours in the vessel of my peace only for them, he says. It's a really remarkable admission. Macbeth recognises that in killing Duncan, he's damned himself. He's given his soul to the common enemy of man. He's destroyed his peace, and all for the sake of others, from his perspective, for Banquo's heirs. If the witch's prophecy holds, this realization drives him to a bloody resolution. Rather than so come fate into the list and champion me to the utterance. In medieval jousting terms, he's calling fate into the arena and fight it. Macbeth decides to challenge fate by trying to kill Banquo and Fleance, thus preventing Banquo's line from ever taking the throne. Here the witches' role as agents of chaos is fully evident. Their prophecy has turned Macbeth against his closest friend and provoked him to double down on evil, compounding regicide with atrocity. Macbeth employs hired murderers to ambush Banquo and his son. While Banquo is killed, Fleance escapes, leaving Macbeth haunted by the possibility that the prophecy could still come true. Banquo's dying words, "O treachery, fly, good Fleance, fly," ensure his son's survival and echo the idea that fate is maybe not so easily thwarted. At the banquet in Act 3, Scene 4, Macbeth is haunted by Banquo's ghost, a product of his guilt and his fear. In that scene, tellingly, Macbeth almost alludes to the witches again. He remarks, "Stones have been known to move and trees to speak," a line that foreshadows the later prophecy about Birnam Wood, but also references that unnatural phenomena. He decides he must visit those weird sisters. I will tomorrow, and betimes I will, to the weird sisters. More shall they speak, for now I am bent to know by the worst means the worst. Macbeth acknowledges that consulting them is among the worst means. It's a dark and evil route, but he's determined to do it for his own good. For mine own good, all causes shall give way, he says. He's prepared to prioritize his security, mortal's chiefest enemy, above all else. Importantly, Macbeth feels compelled to seek out the witches now, whereas in Act 1 they sought him. This marks a turning point in his relationship. He is actively aligning himself with their evil, desperate for their guidance, or at least their reassurances. Macbeth has made himself the witch's creature. He's no longer a hesitant victim, maybe, of suggestion, but an eager client of dark prophecies. So we turn now. Act 3, Scene 5. Hecate's rebuked, and the idea that security is mortal's chiefest enemy. Before Macbeth meets the Weird Sisters again, Shakespeare, or maybe someone else, gives us a short scene featuring Hecate, the goddess of witchcraft, who scolds the three witches for meddling in Macbeth's affairs without her permission. This scene is often considered maybe somewhat dispensable and probably isn't written by Shakespeare, because it doesn't appear to push the plot forward and the style's a bit different than the rest of the play. But still, it does provide a direct commentary on the witch's intentions towards Macbeth, so it's worth a quick bit of examination. Hecate addressing the witches as beldams or old hags is angry that they've acted on their own. How did you dare to trade and traffic with Macbeth in riddles and affairs of death, and I was never called to bear my part? She calls, crucially, Macbeth a wayward son, spiteful and wrathful, who loves for his own ends, not for you. It's a telling description, actually. Macbeth is selfish, caring only for his gain. He's not devoted to the witches or their art. Now, it seems that Hecate finds this problematic. Maybe she expects those who deal with them to show some kind of allegiance or appreciation. Nevertheless, she lays out the plan. She instructs the sisters to meet her at the pit of Acheron, it's a river in Hades, in the morning, where Macbeth will come seeking knowledge of his destiny. He shall spurn fate, scorn death, and bear his hopes above wisdom, grace, and fear. It's a line that captures Macbeth's current mindset. Macbeth seems to believe he can challenge fate. He thinks himself invincible to death in his arrogance, and his hope, his ambition, has overtaken his other wiser faculties, and certainly it's overtaken his moral scruples. Hecate further outlines that they will draw Macbeth onto his confusion by showing him a series of kind of illusory spirits, and then delivers the most significant pronouncement. This is a really key quotation. And you all know, security is mortal's chiefest enemy. By security, she means a sort of false sense of safety or complacent overconfidence. It's a direct statement of the witches' strategy. They intend to lull Macbeth into a misguided confidence that'll be his undoing. Overconfidence is going to make him careless. It's going to lead him to destruction. Hecate's speech, although we might see it as a later addition, neatly explains what we soon witness in Act 4. The witches plan to deceive Macbeth with visions that make him feel secure, even invulnerable, while hiding the conditions of his downfall. In essence, they want to double down on their equivocation, using his own desires and ambitions against him. Macbeth loves for his own ends. He craves personal power, so they're going to feed him some prophecies that cater to that, and they're going to give him a false peace of mind. So let's turn. Act 4, Scene 1. Double toil and trouble. The witches' deceptive apparitions. This scene is the witches' final major appearance, and it is a bit of a showstopper. Act 4 opens with the three witches gathered around a cauldron in a cavern, brewing a grotesque potion. It's the bit of Macbeth that kind of everyone is sort of familiar with. The scene is often staged to really highlight the creepiness. The witches toss repulsive ingredients into a boiling pot. Eye of newt and toe of frog, wool of bat and tongue of dog, fire of birth, strangled babe, and so on. The chant, double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble, punctuates their incantation. It's a sort of dark, ominous refrain. Chanting in rhyming couplets, and the trochaic tetrameter I mentioned earlier is hypnotic, it's incantatory, it's sinister. Shakespeare is deliberately invoking that stereotypical image of the kind of witch's dark, evil Sabbath here, concocting a charm with evil ingredients, signalling that a major act of evil sorcery is about to occur. The potion they brew is meant to summon apparitions that are going to speak to Macbeth. By the time Macbeth enters, the witches are ready. Interestingly, just before Macbeth's arrival, I love this line, the second witch senses him. By the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes. Considering who is saying this, an evil witch, it's remarkable that she refers to Macbeth as something wicked, takes one to know one. It implies that Macbeth has by now become a figure of wickedness on a par with the witches themselves. The tables have turned. Once they were the wicked tempters, and somehow he's a kind of innocent, tragic hero. Now, after multiple murders, Macbeth himself is seen as wicked. Even the witches acknowledge the darkness that has consumed him. Macbeth enters and is far more aggressive and commanding than he was earlier on. He addresses the witches as secret black and midnight hags and demands answers. What is it you do? The witches coolly reply, a deed without a name. That phrase again, a deed without a name, epitomizes their mysterious evil. It suggests that their dark magic is so wicked, can't be named. Macbeth then declares, I conjure you to answer him, and he's willing to risk all natural order for it. Though you untie the winds and let them fight against the churches, though the vesty waves confound and swallow navigation up, though bladed corn be lodged and trees blown down, though castles topple on their warders' heads, even till destruction sicken, answer me to what I ask you. This vivid catalogue that Macbeth just rattles off shows the extent of chaos he's willing to unleash to get his answers. He basically says, even if you cause hurricanes, shipwrecks, crop destruction, forest devastation, and structural collapse, I don't care. Just tell me what I want to know. Ironically, he ascribes to the witches the power to do all those things. Think back to what they were talking about in Act 1, Scene 3. Untie winds, make waves drown ships. And he's reinforcing how formidable and destructive he believes that they are. Macbeth, once hesitant and awed by these creatures, is now trying to kind of command them, boss them around, but in doing so, he acknowledges their control over the chaos of nature. It's a speech that is also Macbeth's implicit surrender of any kind of morality that's left. He doesn't mind if the whole world falls apart, as long as his questions are answered. It's the ultimate expression of his selfish ambition and his kind of moral bankruptcy. Truly, as Hecate has just observed, he loves for his own ends. The witches, unfazed, proceed to grant him the knowledge that he seeks, but in a way that serves their purposes, not his. They summon a series of apparitions, each delivering a prophecy in riddling form, while Macbeth looks on. What unfolds is a masterclass in equivocation, calculated perfectly to give Macbeth false confidence. Now, the first apparition is an armed head. It's a helmeted head, possibly symbolizing Macduff, and it thunders a warning, Macbeth, 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 beware Macduff, beware the Thane of Fife. And then it disappears. Macbeth acknowledges this, confirms his fear of Macduff. Macduff seems like he's already been suspicious of Macbeth and, of course, has fled the country. But he's barely surprised. He already planned to kill or at least watch out for Macduff. He thanks the apparition for the caution, yet tries to ask him more. The witches hush him. The first apparition will not be commanded to speak further. The second apparition is a bloody child. It declares to him, Be bloody, bold, and resolute. Laugh to scorn the power of man, for none of woman born shall harm Macbeth. Macbeth hears this, and in his own words, it reassures him. Then live, Macduff. What need I fear of thee? He exults. The prophecy that no one born of woman can harm him seems to render Macbeth invincible, since every man is born of woman, of course. However, the phrasing woman born is the trap of equivocation. As we will later see, Macduff technically is not born in the usual way. At this moment, though, Macbeth takes it at face value, concluding he's nothing to fear from any mortal man. Yet tellingly, Macbeth immediately chooses to interpret it in a way that still suits his paranoia. But yet I'll make assurance doubly sure. Thou shalt not live, that I may tell pale-hearted fear it lies, and sleep in spite of thunder, he says of Macduff. In other words, Macbeth decides he's going to kill Macduff anyway, just to remove all doubt. It's a critical insight into Macbeth's psyche. Even when given a comforting prophecy, his response is more violence. His paranoia is such that even invulnerability isn't enough. He needs to eliminate all possible threats. This line also ironically shows Macbeth trying to contradict fate. Again, since if no man can harm him, killing Macduff is unnecessary, but Macbeth's determined to do it anyway. The witches have succeeded in making Macbeth feel both confident and emboldened towards further bloodshed. The third apparition is a child crowned with a tree in his hand. It speaks, "Be lion-mettled proud, and take no care. Who chafes, who frets, Macbeth shall never vanquished be, until great Birnam Wood to high Dunsinane Hill shall come against him." This seems even more fantastical. A moving forest? Macbeth again reacts with glee. That will never be! Who can impress or move the forest? Bid the tree unfix his earthbound root. Sweet bodements good. He's now convinced of his invincibility. Unless a forest uproots itself, surely that's an impossibility. He cannot be defeated. The image of Birnam Wood coming to Dunsinane was doubtless chosen by the witches for exactly this reason. It sounds impossible. Thus, it breeds overconfidence, a sense of that security that is mortal's chiefest enemy. Macbeth's language, never sweet bodements, shows how thoroughly he's accepted the witches. He believes he's effectively unconquerable. He doesn't imagine the literal trick the soldiers might carry boughs as camouflage. The witches have so far given him two prophecies that allay his fears. One about no man born of woman, so he has no human enemy to fear, and one about Birnam Wood, no army to fear unless some sort of impossible event. Together, they give Macbeth a false sense of security, exactly what Hecate wanted, since security is mortal's chiefest enemy. At this point, Macbeth is satisfied. Almost. But the seed of worry about Banquo's lineage still burns in him. He demands to know one more thing. Shall Banquo's issue ever reign in this kingdom? Now, the witches at first refuse to answer it outright. They say Macbeth should be satisfied. But Macbeth's insistent, even if it's going to horrify him. I will be satisfied. Deny me this, and an eternal curse fall on you. He's truly come to kind of domineer over these knights, black agents, even threatening them. That's foolish. In response, the witches conspire to show him a fatal and final vision. Well, it's not one delivered in speech, but in spectacle. A procession of apparitions of kings appears, a show of 8 kings, the last with a glass or a mirror in his hand, Banquo's ghost following them. Macbeth is aghast. Thou art too like the spirit of Banquo. Down, he cries at the first king. And as more appear, what? Will the line stretch out to the crack of doom? Another yet, a 7th? I'll see no more. But the vision doesn't stop. The 8th king holds up a mirror reflecting even more descendants, and Banquo's ghost points at them as his issue. Macbeth is devastated by this sight. Horrible sight! Now I see 'tis true, for the blood-bolted Banquo smiles upon me and points at them for his. In this moment, the last part of the witch's initial prophecy is confirmed, unmistakably. Banquo's line will indeed reign in Scotland. Shakespeare's probably alluding here to the idea of James I as a very distant descendant of Banquo. This is the one prophecy the witches withheld in words, presumably because it would not bolster Macbeth's confidence. And indeed, Macbeth reacts with anguish and anger, not overconfidence at this vision. It reinfuses him with fear and a sense of futility. He's murdered and ruined himself for Banquo's benefit after all. The witches have then, we can think of it as a bit of a mixed bag. They've given him some comforting half-truths about his own safety, but there's a kind of brutal, inescapable truth about Banquo's legacy that he can't change. So in doing, they keep Macbeth psychologically kind of off balance, arrogant and yet despairing. So after this show of kings, the witches dance, they vanish, apparently pleased with their performance. Macbeth is enraged. Where are they? Gone. He later calls these witches juggling fiends who palter with us in a double sense, complaining that they keep the word of promise to our ear and break it to our hope. This is a famous line. Macbeth utters it in Act 5, realizing how they deceived him, which basically sums up the witches' method. They juggle the facts, they double speak, giving promises that are technically true to the ear, but delivering betrayal in reality. Macbeth finally sees the equivocation for what it is, but only when it's too late, when Birnam Wood is literally at his gates and Macduff reveals that big twist of his birth. Now, at the end of Act 4, Scene 1, Macbeth hasn't yet unravelled the woman-born or Birnam Wood tricks. He still believes those assurances. He only knows he cannot stop Banquo's lineage now, so in frustration, he determines to act immediately on his last remaining fear. Since Macduff has fled to England, Macbeth sends men to seize Macduff's castle and slaughter his wife and his children. The very firstlings of my heart shall be the firstlings of my hand, he declares, even now to crown my thoughts with axe. Be it thought and done. This is Macbeth's response to the witches vanishing. More bloodshed, more heinous, senseless violence. The murder of Macduff's innocent family is one of the cruelest acts he commits, and it really, in a sense, serves no strategic purpose. Macduff's the threat. Macduff is the threat, not his wife and young ones. But Macbeth's moral compass is completely destroyed by now. The witches' influence, their encouragement to be bloody, bold, and resolute is reflected in Macbeth's line. From this moment, the very firstlings of my heart shall be the firstlings of my hand. Meaning he's going to act on impulse and anger without hesitation or even a second thought. This now impulsive wickedness is exactly what the witches, as agents of chaos, would approve of. Macbeth is, in effect, adopting the witches' own ethos. Merciless, irrational malice. Think about that first witch's torment of the sailor. Macbeth is now killing out of spite, damaging others out of spite. We see then in this scene the full flowering of the witches' malevolence. Through spectacle and spell, they deliver ambiguous prophecies that manipulate Macbeth expertly. They reinforce his hubris. They manage to torment him. They prompt him towards further atrocities, and then they vanish. So we turn now to the final act of the play. That's Act 5. And in some ways, this is the final payoff. It's the sense of the prophecies being fulfilled, but in, at least from the vantage point of Macbeth, in unexpected ways. In Act 5, the consequences of those equivocating prophecies come to fruition. Though they are no longer present, the witches are no longer physically present, their prophecies dictate the climax of the play, and we see that theme of equivocation reach its conclusion. The English army, led by Malcolm, remember, Duncan's son and Prince of Cumberland, next in line to the throne, and also Macduff, they advance to confront Macbeth. To disguise their numbers, they cut branches down from Birnam Wood and they carry them as camouflage as they march on Macbeth's stronghold at Dunsinane. An observer reports to Macbeth that it seems like Birnam Wood is moving towards Dunsinane itself. Those words are like a dagger to Macbeth's heart. His once dismissed impossible condition is happening in a literal military way. Macbeth's reaction is embittered resignation. He sees that the prophecy has kind of lied to him, and yet at the same time it's told him a sort of truth. It's that equivocation of the fiend. It's a sense of the demonic double meaning. And yet even now Macbeth doesn't entirely despair. They've tied me to a stake. I cannot fly, but bear-like, it's an allusion to bear baiting, I must fight the course. What's he that was not born of woman? Such a one am I to fear or none. So the first kind of assurance, if you will, is gone. Now he's clinging to that second assurance. No man born of woman can harm him. It's the last vestiges of confidence, I guess. Macbeth fights ferociously, and he's buoyed by that belief, at least temporarily, in his invincibility. Finally, though, Macduff confronts Macbeth, and Macduff is burning with revenge for the slaughter of his family, challenging Macbeth. Macbeth at first defies him, declaring, "I bear a charmed life, which must not yield to one of woman born." This is the moment where the second prophecy meets its twist. Macduff retorts, "Despair thy charm." Macduff was from his mother's womb untimely ripped. So in other words, Macduff was born by caesarean section. His mother likely died in childbirth, as was often the case in those days. So technically he did not experience what we might term a natural birth. This revelation shatters Macbeth's last hope. Untimely ripped, not of woman born in the normal way, Macduff is the exception to the prophecy's phrasing. Macbeth immediately realizes then that the witches have completely deceived him. "Accursed be the tongue that tells me so, for it hath cowed my better part of man. And be these juggling fiends no more believed, that palter with us in a double sense, that keep the word of promise to our ear and break it to our hope." This anguished outburst is Macbeth's final assessment of the Weird Sisters. He finally calls them what they are, what Banquo realized all the way back in Act 1, Scene 3, when they were instruments of darkness. He calls them now, Macbeth calls them now, fiends or devils who juggle or trick, they palter, they equivocate with double meanings. They told him, "No man born of woman," which sounded like no man at all, but in truth meant no ordinarily born man. They kept their word of promise to his ear. Technically, no one born harmed him. Macduff wasn't born conventionally and broke it to his hope because he interpreted it differently and thus was hubristically overconfident. This is the precise dynamic of equivocation. Macbeth now fully sees the game that has been played on him. Now, importantly, Macbeth's response to all of this revelation, if you will, could have been surrender. He's lost. But his pride, and maybe just a last little vestige of the witch's influence, will not let him yield. "I will not yield to kiss the ground before young Malcolm's feet," he declares. Though he knows the witch has tricked him, Macbeth decides to fight to the death rather than be paraded as a captive. He says, "Lay on, Macduff, and damned be him that first cries hold enough." So in a way, Macbeth's final act is one last fulfillment of fair is foul. He chooses the foul, battle and death, over the fair, life, but in shame. Some, depending on how charitable you are, might read a shred of honour in his refusal to surrender, but given these monstrous crimes, it's more likely stubborn pride and even a kind of self-destructive nihilism. Even so, he dies wielding a sword, not begging for mercy. Macduff kills Macbeth, beheads him, bringing that play all the way full circle to the image of the first apparition, and also Macbeth's own head, relating to that prophetically. The witch's prophecies have all come true in the letter, but not in the spirit. Macbeth did become king, but not securely or for long. None of woman born harmed Macbeth, except one who wasn't actually born of woman in the natural way. Birnam Wood did come to Dunsinane, but it's through human strategy, not some magical ability of trees to move. And Banquo's progeny will reign. Malcolm, who takes the throne after Macbeth, has no children, and it's implied passes on the throne to Banquo's line. The witches have had their will. They destroyed Macbeth by first igniting and inflating him with ambition, then deceiving him with a false sense of his own security, mortal's chiefest enemy, and a false sense of his invulnerability. Right at the end, Malcolm calls Macbeth and Lady Macbeth his dead butcher and his fiend-like queen. Those words, fiend-like, ring especially true with regard to Lady Macbeth's invocation of evil spirits, but also reminds us of those fiendish weird sisters who have orchestrated so much of this tragedy from behind the scenes. So, in conclusion then, across Macbeth, the weird sisters function as enigmatic prophets and malicious manipulators, embodying those core themes of ambivalence, ambiguity, deception, deceptive appearances, and moral inversions. Their language, those riddling couplets, paradoxes like when the battle's lost and won and fair is foul and foul is fair, introduces a world where nothing is straightforward. They speak in equivocations, statements that carry double meanings or seem self-contradictory, until events bear them out. By doing so, they never actually lie, but they do mislead. And it's in the interpretation of their words and the tragedy that unfolds that Macbeth kind of hears what he wants to hear, and he fails to heed the warnings given to him by Banquo. Banquo hears the same words, but remains cautious, and thus doesn't fall into the trap of the witches. Throughout, the witches exploit human frailty, moral frailty, and fallibility, ambition, desire for certainty, pride. They predict, through their prophecies, Macbeth's rise, but they leave the details hazy and obscure. It's Macbeth and Lady Macbeth who fill in the blanks with bloody actions. They warn ambiguously of his fall, but couch it in terms that sound impossible. How can trees move? How can someone not born of a woman harm me? So Macbeth chooses to dismiss the threat until it's too late. Crucially, Shakespeare stops short of making the witches solely responsible. Macbeth is no kind of puppet. He consistently has agency and he makes choices. The witches' prophecies set the plot in motion, but Macbeth's moral failure propels it to its grim conclusion. The witches then are like a catalyst in a chemical reaction. They lower the energy needed for evil in Macbeth to come out. They bring out his latent ambitions remarkably quickly and with explosive results. One could imagine that without them, Macbeth might never have dared to imagine killing his king. With them, he does imagine it, and eventually, with Lady Macbeth's involvement, executes it. The witches don't force his hand, they don't coerce him, they tempt, and he gives in, he succumbs. In that sense, they are very much like the devil as conceived in Christian tradition, tempters who whisper promises and leave the listener then to damn himself. As Banquo wisely noted, and again Macbeth fails to heed this, the instruments of darkness win us with honest trifles to betray us in deepest consequence. Macbeth's tragedy is that he knew this through Banquo, through his own initial misgivings and still allowed those honest trifles, the Thane of Cawdor, the idea of becoming king, that seemed to convince him of the truthfulness of the witches, to blind him to those deepest consequences. The tension between reality and the supernatural is also a thread embodied by the witches. Are they real beings with actual power, or do they chiefly exert influence through psychological means? Shakespeare leaves it open to interpretation. They clearly have knowledge of the future, Cawdor, the manor of Birnam Wood, and Macduff's birth. They conjure apparitions, whether one views that as a theatrical show or true magic, it has real effects on Macbeth. They brew potions, they vanish into the air. In the world of the play, the witches are presented as real. Yet, the play also allows a reading that much of their power lies in words, in language, the power of suggestion and prophecy on a susceptible and vulnerable and receptive mind. It's Macbeth's own imagination that does the rest. So, to sum up, the witches in Macbeth serve as the narrative catalyst and the thematic core for the play's exploration of moral confusion and the corrupting allure of power. Their riddling, equivocating language infects the character's speech and thoughts, as we've seen with Macbeth and Lady Macbeth adopting the equivocating tactics of the witches. That theme of ambiguity, appearance versus reality, is voiced by them first and then echoed by others throughout. Their relationship to fate and prophecy raises questions. Did they merely predict Macbeth's rise and fall, or did they cause it by planting suggestions? Maybe it's a little bit of both. As malevolent agents, they revel in chaos, in storms, hallucinations, madness, and bloodshed. By the end, they have succeeded in turning a respected, noble warrior into a tyrannical butcher and invert the natural order of the kingdom, albeit temporarily, as Malcolm restores order after Macbeth's death. And yet, while order seems like it's restored, seems like at the end order is restored, the lesson lingers. Even the hailing that goes on at the end for Malcolm is a kind of horrible, uncanny repetition of the hailing of Macbeth. The witches have taught the audience a grim lesson about the power of language and unchecked ambition. They've also taught us a bit of a lesson about the supernatural more generally. They've reminded us, because they don't get punished at the end of the play, they've reminded us that evil is this persistent presence in our world, and that the forces of evil often do go unpunished. So, let's recall as we finish Banquo's line. The instruments of darkness tell us truths, win us with honest trifles, to betray us in deepest consequence. The three witches are those instruments of darkness. Their enigmatic words resonate throughout the play as a caution. Beware half-truths and fair promises that mask foul intentions. These emblems, those weird sisters, emblems of evil's power to confuse and corrupt us, challenge us as an audience to see through enticing appearances to the foul reality beneath. Fittingly, the play leaves them where it found them, in the shadows and in the wind. Their work done, their eerie laughter implied on the howling air as Scotland counts its dead. The witches have vanished, but the chaos they sowed remains, testament to their potent, insidious place in this tragedy.